So quite amazingly, Europe's actually ahead of the New World in moving towards some sort of rational approach to gender dysphoria in children. In other words, being cautious and being very careful and not rushing children into things that are going to affect them for the rest of their lives, whether they're able to understand that at their age or not. Here's a headline. England's National Health Service abandons gender-affirming model of care. England's NHS has proposed new guidelines advocating for a more cautious approach to treating gender dysphoria in minors. And it's not just England, it's Sweden, it's France, and these countries are all ahead of the curve on what is euphemistically called gender-affirming care, have seen the results at, stuff like this. 1,000 families sue Tavistock Gender Service, the UK's only children's gender identity development service, run by the Tavistock and Portman NHS Foundation Trust, is to be sued by at least 1,000 families who allege that their children were rushed. They were rushed into taking life-changing puberty-blocking drugs. And why would they be rushed into it? It's not for medical reasons. It's for political reasons. It's for political correctness reasons. Political correctness gone mad. Don't forget, we're talking about children here. As a result, they were facing physical and psychological permanent scarring that will last the rest of these victims' lifetimes, alleged the law firm involved. And of course it will. You take people at their most vulnerable when they're not fully developed and perform what are effectively medical experiments on them. Yes, that might cause some scarring, permanent scarring. The action follows last month's announcement by the NHS that the clinic would be closed over safety concerns. That in turn followed a highly critical independent review by pediatrician Hilary Cass, which concluded in its interim report that a single specialist provider was not a safe or viable long-term option, and noted concerns about GIDS's lack of peer review. And how does this happen? Well, again, it's political correctness gone mad. And then we see this, which probably wouldn't have happened if they didn't have 1,000 families suing them. But anyway, after conducting a systemic review of evidence, England's National Health Service has proposed new guidelines for treating trans-identifying youth, abandoning their previous endorsement of the gender-affirming model of care for a more cautious approach to treating gender dysphoria in minors. The NHS now recognizes that children and adolescents identifying as transgender may be experiencing a transient phase. When have you ever heard about children having a transient phase or flights of fancy? I kind of feel like this is something that the people at Tavistock, for instance, probably should have thought about. So the NHS recognizes that children may be experiencing a transient phase and warns that doctors should not encourage them to change their names and pronouns as social transition is not a neutral act and could have significant effects in terms of psychological functioning. Yeah, it's almost as if adults have a responsibility to protect children from themselves sometimes. The new guidelines reflect evidence that in most cases, gender incongruence does not persist into adolescence for young children. The guidance states that instead of encouraging transition, physicians should take a watchful approach, directly contrasting the American Academy of Pediatrics 2018 policy equating watchful waiting with a harmful form of conversion therapy. How much more obvious does it have to be that institutions like the American Academy of Pediatrics is ideologically captured? They're not guided by science, they're not guided by medicine, they're guided by ideology. It says the NHS guidelines indicate that services will now be led by medical doctors rather than therapists, and will consider the impact of autism and other common co-occurring mental health issues. The new guidelines are set to replace the controversial protocol administered by the now shuttered Tavistock Gender Clinic that affirm a child's self-reported transgender identity and prevent medical professionals from exploring possible underlying factors causing their dysphoria. The case for change, marking their abrupt deviation from their previous approach, is indicated by the, quote, significant and sharp rise in gender clinic referrals and, quote, scarce and inconclusive evidence to support clinical decision-making. That means they don't know what they're doing. Anyway, it looks like some sanity is returning, at least to Europe. Please subscribe, like, and share. Sharing really helps me out. I thank you for that. I will see you next time.